Hello everyone, my name is Kevin McLain, and together with Erica Leicht and Madeline Milner, we will be talking about the California oak savanna, managing for resilience to disturbance. So why do we need to intervene in savannas? The short answer to that is that we need to attempt to correct degradation that humans have created. Savannas are one of the most altered ecosystems on the planet, and only a fraction of this once vast landscape still exists in the U.S. Pre-European settlement, savannas were thought to cover about one-third of the United States, and now only fragments remain in hard-to-access places that are often the last to be developed. And these remnants are degraded and stressed. A lot of this loss is due to land conversion for farming and agriculture. It's also due to urban development. Fire suppression and changes in the disturbance regime is a big one. And then all of these contribute to shift to alternate ecosystems, which from savannas is typically transitioning into either a grassland or a closed canopy forest. Savannas are a critical habitat for supporting bird species diversity as well as other animals. And unfortunately, past management strategies like high-intensity grazing and fire suppression has weakened the resilience of the ecosystem and has limited ecosystem function. We can expect that continued climate change and anthropogenic influence will continue to exacerbate stressors on the ecosystem and present new challenges for future management. So what is there about the savanna? Savannas are just kind of inherently beautiful places. I mean, they have these rolling hills with wide open fields, and they're dotted with trees. And because of their coevolution with fire and fire behavior, they often kind of occur on these hillsides and these hilly areas, which make them really interesting. They've been described as having a park-like beauty because of that structure of the vegetation. There's also, interestingly enough, evidence that humans have evolved in this type of ecosystem and that it is the preferred vegetation type around dwellings. And that's kind of coming from the idea that humans will typically dwell in a grassland or a desert, and then they'll plant trees around their house, or they'll go live in a forest and they'll chop trees down from around their house. Um, Savannas are culturally and commercially significant because they provide lots of resources, and they're very important for livestock grazing too, even more so than just a regular grassland or rangeland, because they have this shelter and shade for livestock, which has been shown to increase the health and productivity of livestock. So what exactly is an oak savanna? Oak savannas are characterized by a distinct separation of the understory and the overstory, with the open canopy of dispersed oak trees in our case, and an understory of grasses, forbs, and sedges. So woody plant coverage can vary from about 1% to 30% coverage on the overstory and still classify as a savanna. But the important distinguishing component is the clear separation between the overstory and the understory. So there's lots of different types of savannas around the world. And then there's 3 different types of oak savanna in the United States. That is the Midwestern oak savanna, the Southwestern oak savanna, and the California oak savanna, which is going to be in California, Oregon, and Washington. And California oak savanna, like our study site is characterized by a dominant overstory of valley oak, blue oak, and then an understory of varieties of needlegrass, bluegrass, barley, and brome. So what exactly maintains savannas? This is somewhat of a mystery to scientists and ecologists still, and it kind of varies with different types of savannas across the globe. Um, but some of the common themes are fires. Definitely, it's been found that intermediate frequency, low severity grass fires is very effective in maintaining savannas in many cases. In some cases, a combination of soil and climate conditions is what maintains savannas. And then grazing and browsing of ungulates plays a role in maintaining them as well. So the suppression of fire, the changing of abiotic factors, and or the concentration of high intensity grazing can significantly alter the structure and the performance of savannas. And really any amount of changing of the intensity, the severity, or the frequency of any of these maintaining components threatens to shift the ecosystem into an alternate state. And that is what we're seeing across the United States and across the world too. So our proposed study, some of the key points, we're going to get into this a little bit more detailed later, but the goals is going to be to test the synergistic disturbance effects of fire, grazing, and invasive species on the ecosystem, to determine the most effective way to maintain the local savannas in order to promote resiliency to disturbances and threats, continue to test the relevance of the IDH, which is the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, and to inform future best management practices of this threatened ecosystem. The methods are going to involve 40-hectare plots exposed to differing levels and combinations of disturbances. And this is a 5-year project which we intend to replicate at 2 other locations to help reduce sampling error in our single site. We will utilize a combination of prescribed fire and controlled grazing in a semi-controlled savanna. And we will take annual samplings, measurements, and other data collection throughout. Our expected outcomes for this is just a better understanding of what maintains oak savannas, a better understanding of the combined effects of common savanna disturbances such as grazing and fire, new management strategies to deal with woody encroachment, invasive species, and the threat of ecosystem shift, as well as innovative ideas on how to provide for human needs while maintaining ecosystem health with low-cost and efficient management strategies.
Hi everyone, this is Madeline and I'm going to walk you through our experiment design for this project. We've decided to use a 140-hectare study site that we will divide into 4 experimental plots. 3 of those plots will be divided into 2 subplots so that they can be treated with different intensities. So we will have 6 subplots. Plot number 1, which will be 20 hectares, represents a typical fire-suppressed savanna and will receive no treatment. Plots 2 through 3 have 40 hectares total and will be divided into 2 subplots of 20 hectares each. Each experiment in total will be replicated at 2 more sites using the same design each time to increase our data. And this table here outlines the disturbances that would be put in each plot. You can see plot number 1 will have no disturbance. For plot number 2, we are going to prescribed burn at low and moderate intensities. Plot 3 will be grazed at low and moderate intensities. And in plot 4, we will do a combination of burning and grazing at both low and moderate intensities. This is a visual representation of the experiment unit that we described in the previous slide so that you can get a better idea of what this project looks like on the landscape. To define the frequency of disturbance we're going to use, low frequency fire will be burned once during the 5-year experiment in the first year, and high frequency will be burned during the first and third years of the experiment. Grazing will be applied each summer and the prescribed burning will be applied in the winter. Our rate for low intensity grazing treatment will be 0.7 to 1 AUM per hectare, and for our moderate intensity will be 1 to 2.5 AUMs per hectare. Our sampling procedure. All sampling methods will be done before the disturbances are applied so that we can establish a baseline of vegetation data to describe the current vegetation community composition. To design our sampling plots, we will construct them around randomly chosen points that we will use GIS to generate. We're going to take 2 75-foot lines that will intersect at a right angle in the center point, and each line will be running north-south and then east and west. So inside of this plot, which we have have in the visual here what we're going to create with our lines. We're going to record for the composition of shrubs, forbs, grasses, and trees, and we're going to take those measurements at 3-foot intervals using the point intercept method for a total of 25 hits per line. This is a layout of what the sampling sites will basically look like once we've created all of our 10th acre plots. A description of the vegetation measurements, what the kind of information we're going to be capturing. The production of all functional groups will be measured by clipping and weighing forbs and grasses and then reconstructing for their production in pounds per acre. And for the vegetation production of woody shrubs, we will measure that 5 times per line using a circular frame and a reconstruction of a weight unit for every species in the sample. Because we want more information on our oak composition and its response to disturbance, we will have separate protocols for measuring the oak population. For basal tree area, we will use a 20 BAF range prism using the center of each plot for our observation point, and we will record the species, diameter breast height, the tree height, and canopy size of all of our in trees. You can see in the photo what it looks like when you use a range prism. It makes a relatively fast way to count your in and out trees. In each subplot, we will also count the hardwood seedlings that are at least 12 inches in length and 1 inch in DBH so that we can estimate oak regeneration in response to disturbance. And to provide some additional data on the composition of oaks versus other trees that are in the stand, in each of our 20-hectare strata, we will conduct 3 zigzag transects where we will record species, height, and DBH. Why are we taking all of this information? We are going to look at it so that we can come up with some inferences on the community and its response to the disturbances. Our initial inventory of the plant community composition, its production, taken into account with climate and soils at all 3 of the study sites, will provide our baseline data to compare the effects of the disturbance to. Annual monitoring of the vegetation community composition and species recruitment following disturbances will be done every year. Vegetation data will be used to make inference on the response of the vegetation to disturbance. So some of the questions that we're looking to answer with this data: what is the effect on oak sapling recruitment? What is the response of non-desirable trees and woody shrubs? And is there an increase or a decrease in production of native grasses?
So, as Madeline just said, we can use the data we collect to answer some important questions about the oak savanna response to disturbance. For example, what is the response of non-desirable trees and woody shrubs? Woody shrub encroachment is one of the main threats to oak savanna resiliency, but there is evidence that managed grazing and prescribed burns can reduce this threat. In their study on cattle grazing in oak savanna in Wisconsin, Harrington and Cathell found a 44% decline in shrub density in grazed areas. Another study found decreased woody shrub cover and opening of canopy in grazed areas. It has also been found that a decrease in fire frequency can cause canopy closure and increased moisture. This contributes to the dominance of forest species, eventually leading to an ecosystem shift. So, as Madeline said, we will measure the response of woody plants to our applied treatments by measuring woody shrub production, species composition, and taking various tree measurements in our plots. Another threat to oak savannas are invasive plant species, and there's also some evidence that managed grazing and prescribed burning can reduce this threat as well. For example, one study found that grazing can reduce dominance by competitive grasses, and also the removal of livestock can cause dominance by invasive annual grasses. Another study found evidence that prescribed burns can reduce cover of non-native invasive annual grasses. Again, we are planning to be able to measure the response of invasive plants and the native plant community by measuring species composition, production of functional groups, along with some other factors such as oak regeneration that will really provide a holistic view of ecosystem response. So there is an emerging pool of knowledge that suggests oak savannas are best maintained through the combination of both prescribed burns and managed grazing. But there are really only a few studies that have actually applied both of these treatments within one study on an oak savanna in the United States. Our study will further benefit our understanding on how the combination of these two management strategies will impact woody shrub encroachment, invasive species, and also the overall ecosystem response to these disturbances. Specifically, our study will narrow down the most effective intensity level of these disturbances, since we are applying both low and moderate level disturbance. And of course, our findings will contribute to the way savannas are managed, especially California oak savannas. So while we are studying some of these individual responses to disturbance, we also need to be looking at the bigger picture and why this is all so important as we move forward in restoration and management of savannas. Loss in resiliency leaves the savanna susceptible to changes in structure and transitions to alternative states. And as Kevin and I have said already, this transition would be towards a closed canopy forest, meaning we would lose all of the benefits oak savannas provide, like critical habitat for bird species diversity and other animals, benefits to the livestock production industry, and the cultural significance the oak savanna holds. But it has been found that immediately following a disturbance, community composition shifts towards historical community assemblages. And as I've just discussed, we've found evidence that the treatments we are applying will do just this in the oak savanna ecosystem. And as we move forward, maintaining ecosystem resilience will only become more important as we face additional challenges such as climate change. So in conclusion, resiliency is key. We hope this study provides the scientific community with a stronger sense of what promotes and maintains resiliency in California oak savannas. Specifically, we hope to promote new management strategies utilizing the appropriate intensity levels of both prescribed burns and managed grazing to address woody shrub encroachment, invasive plant species, and overall ecosystem health. We hope you enjoyed our presentation. This is all the literature that we referenced, and thank you for listening.